Now we're going to look at job costing through a job cost sheet. So what exactly is this job cost sheet? Well, basically, I want you to think about it as what we would call a sub ledger of the work in process account. Okay, so it really summarizes all of the costs on a job that we're putting into work in process. That's what a job cost sheet really represents. Okay, now I'm going to point you to another illustration in your text, and this is illustration 15A.7. And just take a look at that and you kind of see what this job cost sheet would potentially look like. Now, keep in mind, every company has a little bit different document, okay? So as we think about a job cost sheet, we're going to use this example right here. So Sheridan Company, they're making tractor parts, okay? Now remember, we have our three components: direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead that are going to be kind of traced throughout the cost system. Okay, so on our job cost sheet. Now I actually want to start with this one here. So I'm going to start here with this particular job. For Smith 001, it says it requires 5 pounds of direct materials. Now those 5 pounds of direct materials have a cost of $40 per pound. So when we think about the cost to the job, we're going to take 5 pounds times $40 a pound, and that's going to give us our amount of direct materials. Okay, and so let's just look and see what that looks like. Because really what we're doing is we're computing the total cost of this particular job. So part of that is going to be understanding that direct materials are going to come from the raw materials account, and they're going to move into work in process. So we need to make sure that as we move through this process, the physical flow of these costs is $200 coming out of raw materials, and it's going into work in process as direct materials. Now remember, as we work through these T accounts or these visuals, all of our accounts are going to be increased by things on the left and decreased by things on the right. Okay, so keeping that in mind. And remember, work in process is really our job cost sheet. Okay, now, as we think about how we recognize that this is happening, businesses use what's called a materials requisition. Sometimes it's called a materials requisition slip, paper, just something that basically identifies what we're using on a particular job. So if we went out to work on this tractor part and we said, you know what, we need raw materials, we need 5 pounds, we're going to request that from the company to be able to make that. And we're going to do that via this materials requisition slip. So now let's move on to number 2, okay, because we have our direct materials now. Now we need our direct labor. So employees work 12 hours to complete this job. Okay, so that's the direct labor hours, and they are earning $25 per hour. So 12 hours times 25, that basically is going to give us a total cost for direct labor of $300. Now, if any of you have had a part-time job or heard of kind of punching the clock, well, time tickets are what will document how many hours employees have been working on particular jobs. So now at this point, what I want to introduce is kind of a temporary account. And this temporary account is called factory labor. And anytime we have product costs and factory labor, those are going to be accumulated within the factory labor account. Okay, our job in moving the cost is this labor of 300 is moved out. And of course, guess where it goes? Right into WIP. Again, that job cost sheet. And so we're increasing the WIP account by 300 to reflect the amount of our direct labor incurred on this job. Now, finally, what's left is our manufacturing overhead. Okay. Now we're going to get into the applied overhead here in just a minute. Okay. But for right now, what I want to point out is that, remember, every component of manufacturing cost includes direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So when we say that this company allocates manufacturing overhead at $15 per labor hour, that's the driver that we're going to start analyzing here in this chapter, as well as in chapter 17. So direct labor is said to, in this case, drive overhead cost. So this is where we now have this thing called manufacturing overhead applied. And all it means is we're allocating our total overhead cost to all of our jobs. In particular, this one is going to be $15 per direct labor hour. So how do I calculate that? Well, if employees worked for 12 hours, I'm going to take my 12 hours times my rate, which we're later is going to learn is called a predetermined overhead rate of $15. And that is going to give us 180. Okay, 180. So $180 of overhead is applied. Now, this is where it gets just a little bit tricky. Now we're going to come back to this, but I want to show you what's in essence happening. So we're now going to look at this additional temporary account called manufacturing overhead. And the idea is that we add manufacturing overhead costs to this account, and then we allocate them. So as we're going through this allocation process, we're removing 180 because that's been applied to the job. And you guessed it, we're putting it into WIP. Again, that's representing that job cost sheet. So this is our manufacturing overhead applied. Now, this particular concept we're going to cover on the next video. What really is manufacturing overhead applied, and how do we keep track of that manufacturing overhead to make sure that all of our costs are being recognized?